A captain in the middle of an overseas tour loses his one tearaway fast bowler, and in his place, the selectors choose an unknown off spinner. An off spinner so unknown that the said hapless captain responded with the question, Noel, who? Another captain, known once upon a time for his silken grace and his athleticism, once was going through such a bad run of form that once, when the media asked him why he was not batting so well anymore, responded with, well, the boys played well and I batted well in the nets. An entire decade when the team toured every corner of the world playing test cricket and yet did not win a single test match outside their own country, barring one test match in Sri Lanka. But they did come close several times. Closest in one fateful test match in Trinidad, where they needed a paltry 120 runs. Wait, not Trinidad, no? Where was that test match? It was Barbados, sorry. Yeah, I'll do that again. Closest in one fateful test match in Barbados, where they needed a paltry 120 runs to win a rare away test match with a batting lineup featuring Tendulkar, Azharuddin, Dravid, Lakshman, Ganguly, Sidhu, and they still fell short. Bowled out for 81. 81 all out. Those words that we still wear like a badge. A decade when they would tootle off to the desert at the drop of a hat to play Pepsi Cola series against subcontinental friends, if you could call whatever Sanath Jayasuriya and Saeed Anwar dished out as friendly fire. A decade when the Indian board secretary, soon after the announcement of the team for a tough tour of Australia, made a bold prediction for the series result. He predicted 3-0, not to his Indian team, but 3-0 to the opponents. A decade when Indians in the outfield would concede a second or a third run every time they would hurl the ball in from the deep, often underarm, often on the second or third bounce. A decade when the team's hopes would rise and fall based on the form and fortunes of one single player, the Master Blaster. A decade when the raging debate was in club versus country, but cash versus country. To quote that famous English writer, False Chickens, it was the worst of times. It was the worst of times. And so, on episode 81 of Bits and Pieces, the decade of 81 all out, the decade of the 90s, we have the absolute subject matter expert joining us today for a very, very different sort of episode. Please welcome once again on this podcast, Sidvee, aka Siddhartha Vaidyanathan, cricket writer, publisher, founder, and host of the 81 All Out podcast. Also joining me, Nitin Sundar, on this special episode are my fellow journeymen who grew up, as I did in the 90s, falling in love with this wonderful sport because of and in spite of Indian cricket. Please say hello, PGK and Tony. But firstly, say hello, Sidvee. How are you doing today?
Hi. Yeah, wonderful intro. I love the false chickens part.
I mean, I wanted to cry foul when you said false chickens, but I just played advantage, so you could get through that. But yeah, false chickens. Amiss.
Right. PGK is silent. I think he's still stunned thinking about Ijaz Ahmed, as he tends to do on quiet Sunday evenings.
I was just waiting for everyone else to finish because, like everything else, I decided to come last, much like Azharuddin during the 1990s. But yeah, it's been fun.
Right, guys, let's kick off this episode. I'm going to start off with nostalgia because that's pretty much all we have from the 90s. If you close your eyes for a moment and think about 90s Indian cricket, what is that one enduring image that comes to your mind? And I'll start with you, Sidvee.
One. It's hard to pin down one. I mean, I don't know. I mean, you introduced 81 All Out, so maybe I can plug my podcast a little bit more and say that it could be that test. I mean, in a way, we've also glorified that test a bit too much by naming a whole podcast after it. I mean, there were so many other games and so many other heartbreaks that we could have chosen, but yeah, this almost became that standout heartbreak. So yeah, maybe I'll pick that. Maybe the 99 test. Actually, a lot of heartbreaks are coming to my mind. Actually, the 99 test against Pakistan, the 81 All Out. So yeah, maybe one of those.
Excellent. Tony, please bring some positivity to this podcast. Please give us some positive memory.
has to be Sharjah 90, dude. I mean, like, or more so because it happened on 22nd and 24th of April, and my birthday was right in between, 23rd. So it was excellent. I had cake on both days, and like nothing to beat that, right? Like Sachin just going berserk on his birthday as well. So yeah, Sharjah 98, of course, without a doubt.
Wonderful. PGK?
Yeah, for me also, I was going to say Sharjah 98 because that was when I grew up in Sharjah, and that was the first time when a Sharjah match actually like explodes into popular consciousness, and it's such a wonderful time, and I have strong memories of those two matches. But I think I'll go to 96 World Cup. I think 96 World Cup was probably the first time that I really watched the World Cup from beginning to end. Even now, I think if you show me teams, I'll be able to tell you what the scorecard roughly was, who won, who didn't.
Yeah.
Amazing jerseys, and of course, a lot of it. And it was such a wonderful World Cup because much later, when I read Mike Marquez's book, which was, of course, because we have Sidvee here, it was published by them. And that was when I had a complete I looked at it again in a very different light, in a very wonderful way. So I think 96 World Cup in general is the happy time for me.
Yeah,
which we all know ended at the semi-final stage. We did not progress beyond that.
You mean quarter-final stage? We don't want to remember this.
Yeah, but just to bring 81 all out and bits and pieces together, I think 96 World Cup, I remember one spectacular catch by Sanjay
Manjrekar. Yes.
Who was coined bits and pieces. So there you go.
Oh, yeah.
Worlds are colliding.
Ricky Ponting. It was on the thing. He takes it just as it's dropping. Yeah.
At Wankhede, yeah. And importantly, did not ground the ball after taking the catch. In a game against Australia, must be said. Yeah.
He still had 2 fingers under it. It was okay. Depends on the umpire, etc. But Nitin, go yours.
Yeah, I'm actually glad PGK picked 96 because I also was going to pick 96 World Cup, which is actually when I properly started watching cricket live. Thankfully, it was on Doordarshan, unlike a lot of the cricket in that time, which happened to be on cable television. And very specifically, the quarterfinal game, which, the Bangalore game between India and Pakistan is something that I remember really captured my imagination. And it's also good that PGK mentioned war minus the shooting. 96 really was, that World Cup was probably the start of the tipping point in cricket, where India slowly began to become a force off the field and eventually on the field as well. So I think that's a good focal point for this discussion, Sidvee. So what really was lacking in Indian cricket, in the 90s? Like often when they were playing teams, especially the Sena teams, it felt like India were playing a different era of cricket altogether, right? Like they were slower on the field. They weren't taking ones and twos quickly. Their throws were really weak and the fast bowlers were not fast and they really struggled, right? In every sort of way. So what really was missing in that decade and what changed afterwards?
I think in hindsight, it's pretty clear that, it was the bowling, and the moment we had like a fast bowling depth that we could actually draw on, then you realized how frequent you could actually move games forward and win. Ironically, in the 90s, there was so much hope on the batting that every time the batting collapsed, then everyone was like, this is terrible. These are just, these superstars are just playing at home and they can't play away and all that. But eventually, we were able to win at home because we had Kumble and with support from the other spinners, including Raju and Chauhan at home on the pitches that they played in. But away from home, they didn't have the depth. I mean, Srinath was a very good bowler who perhaps, got his length right only towards the latter half of his career. Prasad was a pretty good bowler, but, by today's standards, looking back, Prasad would not have made this Indian team. I mean, he would not even been anywhere close to this Indian team. It's like you probably, would be like the 6th or 7th bowler.
Actually, I'll just say, hold that thought. Yeah, hold that thought because Shardul Thakur is playing. So actually, you never know. Okay, so
Shardul Thakur averages 24 in Test cricket, though. I mean, it's not a joke.
Yeah,
and he bowls high 130s also, which Prasad never did, to be honest.
Yeah. Therefore, I'm saying Venkatesh Prasad is discount T. Natarajan. Agree or disagree?
Exactly. Now that we see this, we know. But back then we always blame the batting. So I think bowling depth is a huge factor. I mean, and now you have Ashwin and Jadeja, and we are actually going to the extent of not playing Ashwin in away tests and all that because of having 2 world-class bowlers. Back then, Kumble, we didn't have that second bowler. Harbhajan came only in like he blossomed only later. He debuted in 98, but he came only later, blossomed later. So
Yeah.
No, but in like instead of hindsight, instead of like actual sight, was it 90s an aberration, or like was it like sort of personifying the person who took us through that decade, Sachin Tendulkar? India just slowed down during the 90s, or was it like on course from where we were in the 70s and 80s?
No, I mean, see, the 70s, you had the spinners, you had such a wealth of spinners. I mean, I don't think, apart from Kumble, I don't think we really had a world-class spinner in the 90s until Harbhajan came on, right? You had a lot of people who they tried.
Yeah.
And then you also, didn't have, Srinath was probably world-class, but when he went abroad, he always used to bowl the Indian length, which didn't really work. So you had to, adjust your length for different countries, which all these bowlers do so well. I mean, Shami
Yeah.
and Bumrah, they just figure out in, within a few overs what length to bowl. So yeah, I think it was a bit of a continuation, but also it was like a lopsided decade where the batting kept building pretty strong levels, which then eventually came to fruition in the 2000s. But the bowling was quite depleted through the 90s. So yeah, I think one way, yes, went back, but the other way it did really go forward.
I had two reactions to Sidvee's points on the bowling. Firstly, he said no fast bowlers, and then he also mentioned Anil Kumble, which is like, come on, fastest bowler. But second point was Javagal Srinath eventually altered his length in the last stage of his career. Normally, bowlers adjust their length in their second spell. Yeah.
Exactly.
But yeah, valid points both.
Also,
I mean,
also the fielding, right? I mean, Srinath could have probably had 50 more wickets had he had a better support. I mean, the number of catches that used to go down of Srinath. I mean, I wish I had noted them down. There's no stats to show that. But is somebody actually noting them down, we would have had a good idea of how much he missed out. Yeah.
And I remember two revolving doors. There were two revolving doors, at least in the later half of the 90s, the second half of the 90s. One was the wicketkeeper and the other was the opener. Like they just could not sort that out until they got Sehwag, who came on until like 2001 types. Till then, they tried out everybody. I remember that revolving door of openers. Some of them end up becoming coaches and sub-coaches and all that right now.
No, the best part about that revolving door is Nayan Mongia walked through both those doors. He was both the opener
and just for symmetry and continuity, right? Basically, right now we have an opener and keeper in the form of KL Rahul, who is going through multiple revolving doors. So
actually, that's a good point. KL Rahul would have been at home in the 90s, right? He's like quintessential 90s cricketer. Just stuck in the
KL Rahul
Actually,
is the Rahul Dravid of today. You just don't realize it.
We'll realize it in 2030.
Actually, I think there was, for the openers bit, there was quite a bit of the Gavaskar hangover, right? Like you wanted the next Gavaskar. When you could have probably got a person like Sehwag or a batsman in the mold of Sehwag, not as good as Sehwag, but in the mold of Sehwag, to try and do that early on. I mean, now, of course, you have openers like Warner. You've had so many other openers, really positive and things. But I think back then you wanted like the Ben Duckett who hardly leaves the ball, right? Yeah, and so but back then I think it was almost like you were craving for that Gavaskar-like replacement, which was never going to happen. How many Gavaskars are going to come in Indian cricket? And the game also changed, so you could have adapted with it.
Yeah.
To your point,
Rahul's father actually wanted his son to be a Gavaskar, right? So
he wanted to name him Rohan.
Rohan, yeah. He thought.
Rahul, Dravid or KL?
No, KL Rahul's dad apparently thought that Gavaskar's son's name is Rahul, so he named his own son Rahul instead of Rohan.
Not realizing that he was named after Rohan Kanhai.
Yeah.
Tony, to your point about the 80s, and how they might have set up the 90s, India were actually very strong in the 80s, right? They won the World Cup, the World Championship of Cricket, and won Test matches in Australia
World
and England.
Championship of Cricket.
Yeah.
Tony's eyes light up whenever we talk about that, because it's immense. He counts it as an ICC trophy because Ravi Shastri did well in that tournament.
Yeah, I think the versatility of those players as well, right? That also was again something they were craving in the 90s. Like you tried Agarkar was supposed to be this next all-rounder, Lakshmi Ratan Shukla. You had all these players who were supposedly the next big thing. But back in the 80s, you actually had a I mean, to talk your podcast name, a lot of really good bits and pieces cricketers, right? I mean, Roger Binney, Ravi Shastri, Madan Lal, all of them who could bat, bowl, do well across conditions. So yeah.
Yeah. And the other side quest they had through the 90s was to find the next Kapil Dev. And that is how it started with Manoj Prabhakar. And so from that point on, they kept trying to find the next Kapil Dev. I still remember
Manoj Prabhakar, who also opened the innings quite a few times.
Who also opened the innings, exactly.
So
and I remember there was also this other weird side quest, which I don't know, maybe it was just my bias, but I remember reading or a lot of people trying to want this, somebody who can be both an opening batter and an opening bowler, right? So which was Manoj Prabhakar for a while. And I remember like Gagan Koda for a while. I don't know. I think Gagan Koda used to bowl. I don't know if it was an opening bowler, but I think he used to, of course, he also tried out in that revolving door of opening batsmen. I think got a couple of ODIs. So they were trying a bunch of people to fit this because, it was just some weird constructs from the past trying to get jigsaw puzzles to try to fit it. It's very, very strange.
That Kapil Dev hangover continued all the way until Irfan Pathan, right? And I think then it stopped. I think after Irfan was done, they said, okay, we don't want any more Kapil Dev.
Hardik also for a brief while.
Wait, we have the new guy, Shardul Thakur.
Shardul is the answer. Correct.
Come on.
I like how conveniently nobody realizes that Sourav Ganguly was the replacement for Kapil Dev. Nobody ever says he's that. He was captain also, but no.
That's true.
I actually thought you were going to go for R. Ashwin. PGK.
And Ganguly even opened the bowling a few times when India
and got Mark Taylor and whatnot. Cheaply. Absolutely.
Greg blew it maybe.
Is this because Gavaskar also opened the bowling? Is that why we
Oh, yes.
Yes, he also. Oh, so basically Kapil Dev and Gavaskar are the same guy. We have unearthed a lot on this podcast.
Kapil Dev made 36 in 60 overs. Gavaskar made 175. Basically, that's what we are trying to say.
But you were talking about the openers, right? And you mentioned, Sidvee, that we could have tried out maybe a maverick like I'm saying a maverick like Sidvee. We could have tried out a maverick like Sehwag in the 90s itself.
They should have tried me out. Honestly, I would have been the answer to that.
They were literally looking for anyone who would just go and make the ball old, right? Very often that's what they even said. We want someone to make the ball old so that Dravid and Tendulkar can come and bat properly. And
even someone like Sidhu, right? I mean, Sidhu was quite an aggressive player, and when he played in India, he would be aggressive against both pace and spin. Of course, he didn't believe spin should exist. Go mad. But when he went abroad, remember that West Indies series, the same 81 all-out series, where he made like some of the most boring. Like,
he made a double hundred, no?
He made a double hundred in a tour game, and everyone died, I think, watching that.
No, he made a double hundred in the test match. He made a double hundred in the test match, the second test, if I remember it. But he made it over 3 days. Yeah.
So basically, so that's the thing. Like, suppose somebody had told him that, it's fine, just play the way you play in India. It's fine. We'll back you. Who knows what could have happened, right? Now you have just like they're doing in England and saying, okay, go for your shots. You're not going to be like ostracized forever or something like that. Yeah.
Sidhu in India was actually aggressive against pace, spin, and also off the field. But okay, let's not do it.
That is true.
Yeah. Of course, he was so aggressive. He took the flight and came back from England to India. Also.
But Sidvee, I mean. I think there was one real reimagination of Sidhu that happened towards the second half of his career, right? Yeah. What was that about? Like, how did that come about?
I think basically Sidhu was the kind of guy who, if somebody criticized him, right, he would take it really personally. So, in fact, in 1983, the famous story, which you guys have definitely heard, is Rajan Bala calling him a strokeless wonder in the newspaper, and that Sidhu actually cut out that newspaper clipping, put it on his in his house, and use that as motivation to come back into the team. And apparently when he came back, he also had a bit of a confrontation with Rajan Bala and told him that, now, what do you think now and all that. So, so I think Sidhu, the latter half was basically people ridiculing his fielding, right? Because he was such a bad mover and such a bad runner. I think he decided, okay, fine. Now I'm going to show this whole world what is going to happen. And he became like, because he was still not a great fielder, but he was trying really hard to be a good fielder.
Yeah, he took a couple of great close-in catches in some test matches against Sri Lanka. I vaguely remember. And
nowadays, cricketers get offended and post Instagram stories instead of like.
Sai Baba is watching because Sai Baba is watching. has logged into
Virat Kohli
Instagram.
has turned into Sadhguru 2.0 of late. So
No, but also
good
there are.
latter half.
Yeah, but Ridhiman Saha, I'm sure, has screenshots of WhatsApp from Buria, which he looks at every day to motivate himself. Or Ravindra
Waifu.
Jadeja has the tweet. Yeah,
Motivate himself by not playing in the Duleep Trophy. It's
By
not
not
like
playing
he's
the Duleep.
playing. He's like, no,
That's true.
I will not
Yeah.
play.
No,
But,
Sidhu had a bit of a Stuart Broad about him. He had that, let's show
Yeah.
them kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as most people know, I mean, the reason why Ganguly debuted was obviously because Sidhu walked out of the tour, right,
Yeah.
in 96.
Yeah.
That was the main reason why the second half of the 90s, the whole tide turns and we get like Dravid, Ganguly. It was very
In
hard for
fact,
them
two
to break
things.
into the team.
Sidhu does two things. One, in 1994, he wakes up with a really bad neck and Sachin gets to open.
Tendulkar opens.
That's
Correct.
Correct.
that's a revolutionary move on Sidhu's part to wake up with a bad neck. And
That's true.
secondly,
That is his
he
legacy.
comes back and Ganguly and then Dravid and all get a chance. So yeah, Sidhu.
Yeah.
I think Navjot Sidhu's contributions to Indian cricket have been he's not got his
Yeah.
due.
Most unsung
Sung
opener.
about, yeah.
And then of course he
And that is
destroyed
anyway a very
Shane Warne
short
Thing about
before-
himself. Yeah.
No, he destroyed Shane Warne before Sachin could destroy Shane Warne. That
Yeah.
also. So number 3. So
Yeah.
all 3 counts.
So technically,
I-
Amit Pagnis destroyed Shane Warne first. Right?
That's true.
I never thought when we started this podcast that we'd be talking about unsung heroes from the 90s. Okay, I didn't know there was such a thing. Okay. Clearly, we found one. Okay.
Navjot unsing Sidhu. But just to change tack a little, right? What was it like actually? What is the feeling watching the Indian cricket team as the 90s unfolded? I mean, hindsight is good, but like, was it with hope or trepidation or like you just have to because it's part of culture? What was it like?
I think there was a lot of hope, which would eventually turn into trepidation at different stages of the match, where you almost were so sure in your head that they're going to lose. Like that is
Yeah.
the thing, right? That's why Sharjah 98 is so remembered, because in your head you'd given up. And
Yeah.
so, the fact that India actually won that tournament and those 2 games, and with Sachin basically playing and everyone else just being there, being present.
Yeah.
So that itself is like, was so memorable. But ironically, the 90s are probably the decade where I watched the least cricket. Because you're doing other things, right? You're going to school, you have other stuff to do. But you're so in the sport, you're so living it, you're reading everything about it, you're talking about it, you go to school the next day after the match, and even if you watch like 10 minutes of it, that's all you're talking about, right? And then
Yeah.
and then you hear the other people who have watched 10 more minutes of it, and you're like, you
And
feel
then-
you've watched it. You feel
Yeah.
you've watched it, even though you haven't. Like, honestly, 96 World Cup, you said, I did not watch that De Silva innings live in that semi-final because
Yeah.
I was going from school to home. I was on the way, right? But somehow I'm convinced I watched that innings. I'm convinced I've been scarred by that innings because I've seen it later. I've talked about it and this thing.
Yeah.
And that guy got out with some
14th
14th over or
over.
something.
Yeah.
This is like Nitin Sundar ghost watching the test match in Chennai or imagining a bowler.
Shoaib Akhtar.
Shoaib Akhtar. Yeah. When I was
No, but
interviewing
that-
him, he was telling me about Shoaib Akhtar.
No, but that De Silva thing is very true, huh? Because my school was in this place called Gopalapuram in Chennai, right? And and I used to live in Gopalapuram, so it was like a 5-minute walk from school to home. By the time I got home, Jayasuriya and Kalvitana were out, and I saw De Silva's innings. So I was actually scarred by that innings. I know my friends who lived in T Nagar didn't get to see De Silva's innings. By the time they got out, he was already out. So yeah. I think we just didn't expect that team to win much, and as kids, I guess we didn't have too many other avenues for entertainment or whatever. So we used to back this team, and we were just very happy whenever they won, whatever they won, right? And even if they lost like close games, we took a lot of heart from it. The fact that they competed and did well. At least for me, that was pretty much it. Was it sort of fed into continuing to back that team and hoping that they do better. And there were these sparks that are very special, like Titan Cup and Sharjah and all. We'll never forget. They were so rare.
Kanitkar, Chauhan.
Yes, exactly.
They are all cult heroes, right? Because they gave us those moments where they surpassed our expectations. Honestly, nobody expected India to win those games. At least I didn't expect India to win those games. So when that happens, that's a different thing. Now it's actually the reverse. Now you expect India to win everything.
Yeah.
So when they go to a final and they lose, there's a huge disappointment.
Yeah.
But I'm looking back at it and saying, dude, what do you mean? They're the final, man.
Yeah, exactly.
I think
Yeah.
So
my
I
lens.
think the way teams react to this current Indian team is also a function of their age. So the people who are probably in their 20s are so like
Yeah.
expectant. They are like,
Yeah.
these guys are chokers, these guys can't win, they, all that. But for me, it's like little more like they're really good. They're always competing, man. Come on.
Yeah. That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think for me, the way how I looked at the whole, or at least most of the 90s, of course, you would follow the World Cups and all the international stuff. But the home games for me were actually the games at Sharjah, simply because I lived there and simply because I would play cricket with Pakistanis and Bangladeshis, but everyone made fun of Bangladesh because they didn't have a team. But anyway, but I would play
Nothing has
cricket with
changed.
Pakistanis.
Nothing has changed.
Nothing has changed. Yeah. And my dad used to work for a cement factory there, and his colleagues were Pakistani. So he would be, when India would lose a game in Sharjah, he would be like, God, I have to go and deal with these guys tomorrow, and they're going to like rub it in. And that was the time when Pakistan was definitely like in the ascendancy, because 92 they had won. So I was actually, before this, I seem to remember India losing a lot in Sharjah. And I was like, is my memory correct? Because who knows, like Nitin, it might be some phantom memory. So I went and actually checked. So it turns out India has played 38 matches in Sharjah in the 90s. They have won 18 and lost 20. Okay, not bad.
It's not too bad.
Not too bad. Then I changed the opposition to Pakistan. And it turns out India have won exactly 3 games in Sharjah against Pakistan. And each of those 3 games are like 4 years apart, right? So I'm just going to tell you. I'm going
Is
to tell
there
you
a
the
Friday
3 games.
filter also?
There is, yeah, that's a good question. I haven't put the Friday filter yet.
One game is definitely that when Sachin gets Saklan in the end and he sends him off, right?
Sends
That
him
is
off.
one
That is
game
correct.
for sure.
Yeah.
That is correct. That is the one that happened on April 15, 1996, by the way, my birthday. And this was the first game that India played against Pakistan after the 1996 quarterfinals.
Yeah.
So this is that
Oh,
game.
no, they
against
played one tournament in Singapore also.
Singapore.
Yeah,
Then
Singer
they went to
Cup.
Sharjah. Yeah.
Correct. They played the Singer Cup. I didn't know if Pakistan was there. I remember Sri Lanka being there and Jayasuriya
Oh, yeah,
thrashing
Pakistan
us
won
again.
the tournament, man.
Pakistan won after Jayasuriya hit the fastest 50.
Oh, right. That was the Afridi debut. Was that?
No,
the
that
Afridi
was
debut?
Nairobi.
Oh, that was later.
Yeah.
Okay,
That was
anyway.
later.
So that was later. Fine. So India, you're right. So India play Pakistan in this. And incidentally, this game, Sidvee, that you're talking about, is the first time that India in ODIs cross and score more than 300 runs.
300.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. So they scored 305. Sachin Tendulkar 118. Navjot Sidhu 101. Together, they put up a partnership of almost 231 runs. Right. And then, of course, you get Jadeja again coming in, beating a little bit, Azharuddin coming in the end, and they get Pakistan all out for 277.
In fact, my memory of that game is Azharuddin hitting
Azhar.
Ataur Rahman for those
In the last over.
sixes.
Yeah.
And some shoe, basically Atta's shoe coming off. And Azhar, Azhar was so pissed off with the media that he finishes that. And then he's like pointing to the media box and he's, saying stuff and all that. So I remember that. Yeah.
Azhar was very out of form and he was refusing to go out to bat. And Sachin had to sort of coax him to go and bat. So we've become that podcast where, we talk about other podcasts. So I'm going to plug Heads and Tails podcast here. Talk about this match. The very first episode of Heads and Tails talks about this match in great detail, including Tendulkar's send-off to Sakleen Mushtaq, which was out of the blue. He gives him a massive send-off after getting out the last wicket. It's fun. But
yeah, in that game, Azhar actually plays basically a Rinku Singh innings. He gets 29 out of 10 balls.
Rinku Singh.
Yeah.
He's played
sorry,
season.
Sanju Samson India. I'm sorry, I misspoke. Okay, 29 out of 10 balls, 2 4s and 2 6s. So yeah, and so this is the first game that they won. The second game that they actually the first game that they won was in 1991, and the player of the match is someone who is very close to our heart, Sanjay Manjrekar, who basically gets 72 out of 93 balls, and you can see this lineup. And it looks like you can see the early 90s cricket team, like opening Ravi Shastri and Navjot Sidhu, imagine. Okay. 1 down Manjrekar, 2 down Azharuddin, 3 down Tendulkar, then Kapil Dev, Kambli, Kiran More, Prabhakar, Srinath, Raju. This is the team.
That's a good level, to be honest.
That's a good level. And they get 238 and they beat Pakistan. Again, this was, I think, just before the World Cup. So I think they've always beaten Pakistan like just around the World Cup time. This is October 1991, and I think immediately after this they go to Australia, and of course Pakistan win it. So the Pakistan team is basically the World Cup team. The third victory,
99. I remember this one. Yeah,
that is correct. It's in 1999. Do you want to say what do you remember from this game?
Oh, I remember it distinctly. It was a third string Indian team. It was led by Ajay Jadeja, and he had one bowler, I think, Venkatesh Prasad. And
Correct.
I think
I remember
Ramesh
this game.
and Dravid score 70s in the chase. So they
Correct.
managed
They
to.
both scored
Agarkar
80s.
plays, yeah, something like that. Yeah, so low
Is
scoring
this
game.
the game where Jadeja also bowls and gets some wickets?
It's that series.
That
He
series.
got the
Oh.
3 for 3 in that series
England.
against England. Yeah.
Correct.
And this was also just before the 99 World Cup. So, though, by the way, in the
Exactly.
final,
Oh, I thought this was also
Pakistan
just
demolished
on-
India in the final.
Exactly. I was going to say that. I was going to come to that next. I was like, wow, this is like, so you actually see these three Indian teams, right? And you can see the evolution of Indian cricket just through these three matches that they win in Sharjah. One in 1991 with this Ravi Shastri, Navjot Sidhu, Tendulkar batting at 5-6. The second one with Vikram Rathod, Tendulkar, Sidhu, Jadeja, Srinath. So that team. And then finally, that transition team that comes in 1999, where they're opening with Amey Khurasia and Sadagopan Ramesh. So the revolving door has begun. Ajay Jadeja is the captain. Robin Singh comes into the team. Strangely, Vinod Kambli is still there. Okay, but anyway, so I think this is the time where they're trying this out. And you're right. In the final, they just demolish India. They get India 125 all out. And this is when Wasim Akram goes completely berserk. And he gets both Ramesh and Dravid with LBWs in like the
In
first
the first
ball.
over. First over.
The first over, exactly. The first over each. And this lineup that Pakistan has at that time is basically the lineup that nearly like wins them 99. Probably their best bowling lineup. Because
Well, India
Wasim
beat
Akram,
that
Shoaib
team
Akram-
in the World Cup. India beat that team in the World Cup.
Correct.
So,
That is
there you
correct. They
go.
beat that team in the World Cup.
But PGK, through this evolution through the 90s, to
Yes.
express Sidvee's sentiments in Nitin Sundar's words, who were the bowlers? You only mentioned the Indian batters during this these three periods. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. I'll tell you the bowlers in 1991. Of course, we had Prabhakar, who, by the way, gets 4 wickets in that game. So it's Prabhakar, Kapil Dev, Javagal Srinath, Ravi Shastri, Raju. That is the first 1991 team. The 1996 team, you can guess. If you want, you can try. It is very similar to the team that basically comes to the World Cup. So you have Srinath, you have Prasad, you have Kumble, you have Tendulkar, you have Ajay Jadeja, and there is one more bowler. I'll give
Tendulkar and
Mambre.
Ajay Jadeja are full-on bowlers, is it?
Yeah, Jadeja bowls 2 overs. Tendulkar's bowled 7 overs.
Tendulkar was always a full bowler for India. Was it Paras Mambre or Salil Ankola?
It wasn't Paras Mambre. It wasn't Salil Ankola. It's somebody whom we don't really talk about much. In fact, I'm also
Rajesh
opening his
Chauhan.
profile. Nope. It was this gentleman who played 17 ODIs and 4
Sunil
test
Joshi.
matches.
No.
No. Born in Chennai, but okay, but his name is weird. His name is Ashish Kapoor.
Ashish Kapoor, of course.
Wow.
Yes.
Born in
Ashish
Chennai.
Yeah, he
Yeah,
played
this
for TN in the Ranji Trophy.
Correct.
He played for every team, I think, Ranji Trophy. He traveled around India and played for all teams.
Oh, yeah, he did in the latter stages. He was a journeyman.
Correct.
And now
And
he's
by the
with
time
Lucknow Super
He's
Giants.
with one of the IPL
Not
teams.
for
Ah, yeah.
Yeah, sorry. I was just saying that by the time they come to 99, the bowling lineup, again, Prasad, of course, Agarkar, Kumble, Robin Singh, who bowls 10 overs for 26, Sunil Joshi and Ajay Jadeja. So you see like the evolution of it. Across
Amazing.
the
Yeah.
years.
I think that tells you, and that time there was also this whole thing of how the Miandad Six had basically scarred the entire generation of Indians, and how India cannot win in Sharjah because of that Miandad Six, and all those theories you were floated about as well.
There were
Yeah.
so many urban legends, which is that India were mentally weak. The Friday thing, I'm tired of the Friday thing. I kept hearing a lot of the Friday thing as a child, that India can never win on Friday. So there were a bunch of these things.
I think there's a lot of myth in that. I don't think there were that many matches on Friday. I mean, I think they lost
Exactly.
on all days.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's exactly correct. Later I found that.
On all days that end with why we were losing to Pakistan.
Yeah.
No,
Okay,
but
so-
No,
it
also
was
that's also partly why all those defeats, right? You see, that's also partly why the Pakistan team used to inspire both an admiration and a dread for fans like us. Like, we knew they were really good. And, probably, I mean, for me, I supported them in the 92 World Cup final against England. I mean, I was in the anyone but England stage back then. And
If you want
Pakistan-
us to edit this out, tell her. We'll do that. Just
Oh, that way. No.
Just kidding.
Happy to wear it like a badge. So, no, but also when they were playing against India, there was a serious dread, which is only accentuated with even on the 96. I was at the stadium, in fact, in Bangalore, the quarterfinal. There's
Yes.
serious dread when Amir Sohail and Saeed Anwar were batting. Like, you were shivering. I was probably close to shivering, because that's how much you feared that team, and the way they were batting, they could finish that in like 40 overs or something. That's how easily they were hitting everybody. And then the 99 test that I mentioned against Pakistan, again, by the end of it, everyone was like so scared. Like, okay, stop this, man. I'm so scared. So yeah,
I like how
attitude.
there is so much trauma and we have still not mentioned 96 tour of South Africa and Durban. I mean, like, there's like we have forgotten about
Oh,
that.
yeah.
But oh yeah, there is South Africa tour in the middle of all this as well.
100 all out, 66 all out.
66 all
100,
out.
66
no?
and 100. Yeah,
Oh,
66,
Yeah,
66.
66. And
And
Dravid
in
top
that-
scores in both innings.
In that 66, there is this Ganguly getting bowled by a Donald or a Pollock Yorker, where he's not looking at the ball at all. He's looking somewhere behind the bowler in a daze. Ganguly is in a complete daze. He's not seen the ball. He just walks straight towards the pavilion after missing it. Straight Yorker. Like, amazing. And Tendulkar gets that in swinger from Donald, right? And he gets bowled. My goodness.
Amazing ball. Amazing ball. Yeah.
Amazing.
White lightning. Yeah.
Yeah, but
Right.
even it's funny that even from that series, we talk about the Sachin and Azhar partnership as something that, to hold on to.
There's
I
a
mean,
book
guess that's
about,
got
about that.
There's an
partnership.
actual book. Yeah, there's an actual book written about
Exactly,
it.
right? Got completely hammered in that game, but we still held on to these things, right? And
Yeah.
honestly, that partnership was given when it came, and the expectations you had at that moment, you were almost like negative, man. You're like,
Yeah.
okay, why am I even watching this? And then these guys just come and do original baseball, right? I mean, that partnership was probably baseball OG of baseball partnerships. So
Back
yeah.
then, we called it as ball because Azharuddin was doing it. But yeah.
Was that the partnership that was ended by Adam Bakker's
Paul Adams?
Correct.
Oh, sorry,
Yeah.
Adam Backer, not Paul Adams.
That was
Yeah.
a phenomenal.
Oh
phenomenal.
yeah.
That's still stuck in my head. Sunil Gavaskar
Same.
saying he's pulled it out of thin air.
Yeah.
What a guess.
Hey,
Yeah.
so question slightly personal question for all of you. How old were you in '96? Just to get a sense.
I was 11.
15. I was 15.
I was 12.
Actually,
So that-
96, if you're talking about the World Cup,
Oh,
I was 14.
It was general
14.
question.
I mean, it depends, right?
Sidvee is
Depends on
going
the
for
month.
full-on accuracy.
It depends on the month, no?
Yeah, all the matches
Best
you
is-
remember
that is-
happened on birthdays. So this is important to clarify.
That is the age where you're supposed to say I was 12 and a half, 13 and a half. Okay, so no, I was
Sidvee
12.
deeply scarred by DDMMY. Why?
But why?
Okay,
Okay, talking
Yeah, I
of
was
before you
If
take
I
that
don't-
further, the one thing I remembered when you asked this question was this boost ad. I was 14 years old and I went to Pakistan.
16, no?
Or
There were
whatever, yeah.
7 guys around me.
There were
trying to
7 guys around me
distract
trying to
me.
distract my concentration and get me out.
Get me
Boost
out.
is the secret of
16,
my
16.
life. 16, yeah.
Now after that it is बैठ कर gift निकाल के
Boost kit.
Oh my God. No, but why I asked this age question is, I'm guessing all of you, PGK was obviously in the Middle East, but both of you were in Chennai, I was in Kerala. Like 1990, the Malayalam movie that released called Number 20 Madras Mail. I'm guessing you guys
yeah.
have seen
Yes.
it. Has
Yes,
a
yes, yes.
protagonist called Tony Kurishingal, right? Who's Mohanlal.
Yes.
And basically, the movie starts with them felicitating these guys because they're getting on a train to go and watch a test match in Chennai.
Yeah.
That was the cultural milieu in
Interesting.
Kerala where like it was considered an achievement to go and watch a test match and all of that. Like,
I forgot
now
that was
it's
the
an
quest of the
achievement
movie. I
to-
remember Number 20 Madras Mail.
Yeah.
I forgot it was to see a test match. Oh God. Okay.
Even
Yeah,
to
yeah.
getting into a stadium, even now is an achievement. That is not
No, no,
changed.
so-
Please.
So
I hope
my
they were
sort of
not
question-
wearing black or something. They would not have been allowed into the stadium also.
so my kind of question connecting the two was how much of cricket watching and growing up was influenced by the cricket culture around you or lack thereof. Do you think like it was the only sort of thing that you kept sort of discussing in school? I think Sidvee, even in your book, which I read a while back, What's Wrong with You, Karthik? Cricket is a theme, right? So how was it growing up? Like did the uncles around you sort of influence that watching technically how to play the game correctly, how to analyze the game, etc., or was that a byproduct?
I think it was a combination of things, but the 90s is really interesting, right? Because TV explodes in the 90s, like early and mid 90s, with cable and all that, especially if you're living in the metros. I mean, I was living in Bangalore, which is not technically a metro, but okay, metro-ish. So you got access to TV, but which my dad's generation didn't have as much. I mean, a lot of their experiences of cricket was on radio or just reading stuff or something, or actually going live for the match, which was probably once in 3 years or 5 years or whatever they went to. So that was interesting. But also what was interesting was that this excessive distractions hadn't happened yet in the 90s. like it was still like cricket was there for you, but it was almost like the only thing that was there for you.
Yeah.
Like the other sports hadn't really caught on that much. I mean, they used to show football and all, and basketball. I remember watching basketball in the mid-90s, but it wasn't a conversational point in school. In school, everyone was always talking about cricket. And like you'll have them three guys talking about basketball, and they'll be like, oh, what the hell? Who's watching this sport kind of thing? So so I think that was the big advantage for cricket in the 90s, because it was the centerpiece. But number two, in terms of culture, I mean, for me, I went to the same school that Dravid went to and Uttapa later went to. And so there was a serious cricket pedigree in the school. And school cricket was a big thing. Like, the 3-4 top players in school cricket were like superstars in school. I mean, they would walk around, with the collar up and all that. A little bit of and I mean, so there was a lot of that there. You would go to inter-school matches were huge. Like the whole school would actually go to a final, like an inter-school final, to cheer your team against the thing. I mean, which is what inspired that scene, that chapter in the book.
The book.
In the book. And in fact, there was a really good player called Nandan Kamath, who's now
Law and
the
K.
Go Sports. Exactly. And Nandan Kamath was like an amazing schools cricketer. Like, people thought that it's the next Dravid right there, and he was a really big hitter and all that. So that Stephen's character and that six is all inspired by six that Nandan Kamath hit, actually.
Nice.
And so you see these things, and schools was huge, and people just packing the grounds in a school ground, and also that made a huge difference to me watching and reading also. I did, but I was not that good. See, my school had a really strong team. So, it was really hard to get a game even, because they were really good. Like, a couple of them went on to play like for the state in the under 16, under 19 and all that. And and maybe even one played Sudhindra Shinde played a few Ranji games also. Like, he played a few Ranji seasons, actually. He was in our school. So, it was hard to get it. But you get influenced by it. And then newspapers, I mean, and magazines, right? That was actually a time of proper magazine writing in sports. You had Sports Star, you had Sports World. There was a magazine called Sports Week, which we didn't get that often in Bangalore, but which we would find in second-hand stores. And also, a lot of this magazine culture was there.
Cricket Samrat.
Every day you read. Cricket Samrat I didn't read because I was not so fluent. I mean, I didn't know Hindi that well. But you read the newspaper every day. Every day, it's like the first thing that I read was the Hindu sports page. Like, forget about
keen contest on the cards.
Mambalam Mosquitoes take the first innings lead against Jolly Rovers.
Correct. Right. So you read it word for word. You read it in the morning. You read it quickly because you're going to school. You read it in the morning, and then you come back and it's almost like a revision in the evening. You're like, okay, actually seeing stuff. You're cutting out a few things, mugging up parts of the scorecard because you have to talk. No, next day you have to talk to people about it. You have to remember because if you say no, that guy he just scored 26. Another guy will come and say no, 28. What 28? Why are you saying 26?
What?
This is also the time of WWF trump cards and then those Center Fresh collectibles, if you remember.
Center Fresh cricket trump cards also.
Yeah, exactly. So everyone used to buy heart all the statistics, right? Like
you had to. Yeah, like you would be like, the best bowling figures, right? 6 for 26 clash. Yeah, like it's almost like nobody else has taken 6 for 26, man. Come on.
I almost feel
Javed with that 7 for
37. I almost feel the board and the entire cricket establishment woke up to how big cricket is based on this sort of fandom that they started seeing in our generation, really. Because I believe that, like your parents' generations were also equally passionate about Indian cricket, and surely, purely based on the size of the demographic, India would have already been the biggest country for cricket even then. But I don't think anybody realized what that commercial potential was until sort of the mid to late 90s, right? Even the board. I, in fact, remember Ganguly many years after he retired. In an interview, he was saying in his early years of captain, when he was captain in this early 2000s, not even 90s, he was like, we as a team did not have access to gyms. We did not know what to do after going to a gym. So we would just not go there. We just go do some treadmill work and be done with it. And this was a time when other teams had already started, sports medicine and everything in a very serious way. So India just got to the whole game late, right? And eventually caught up.
Yeah, big time. Yeah. Like most things, right? They got to T20 also late. I mean, it so happened that they were in a great position with the market and with the fandom, but they got to it 6 years too late, way after England had started it and they were playing it. And in fact, in 2006, I called up the then one of the top people in the BCCI and to genuinely, ask them what were their thoughts on T20 and were they thinking of this and all. And the blunt answer I got was, why should we start? Why? What is there to gain? This is 2006.
That is the first question.
2007 ICL happens, 2008 IPL happens.
But so I mentioned Center Fresh, but I don't know if you remember, before that, there used to be big fun with some, I don't know, cricket memorabilia. Was it cricket cards or something? I remember.
Yeah.
And then
wasn't that a bubble gum?
Yeah. So my question was like,
bubble
gum and chewing gum were very big in the 90s in cricket, right? It is almost disappeared now. Like, what is the evolution of chewing gum?
That's a good point about the connection between chewing gum and cricket. I think maybe the Richards had something to do with it as well. Because that time a lot of people used to chew and play.
Yeah.
After COVID, I think it became a bit. Because they didn't want saliva on the ball and all that, so maybe chewing gum got a bit ostracized in the pre-pandemic.
In fact, there were some batsmen who, after they get out, would spit out the gum and hit it with the bat as they were walking back. Like Gibbs, I remember, used to do that.
The other thing that we stopped seeing,
even if it falls on the ground, he just puts it back in. Marnus Labushin.
Toasty in the pocket.
COVID protocol.
The other thing that we stopped seeing after the 90s is actually the zinc sunscreen.
Yeah.
Right? Which you never seen after the 90s. And I don't know why.
You see it now. Like Hardik, I think, sometimes does it.
But it is not.
Umar Akmal, dude.
It's not like the way McDermott and the Aussie bowlers.
It's not a fashion statement.
Donald, right? It was like, and I remember a lot of people telling me that one of the reasons why they do it is because it is to look intimidating also.
Yeah.
There is a psychological aspect to it. It's like war paint. It's like the haka, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Which is what I thought. But then now if for some reason people have sort of like it has reduced.
I think it might have been Srinath Mongia who wrote a long piece on this, on the zinc paint and the thing in Cricket Monthly. You can check it out. The other thing that went out also, which I think is natural with the societal evolution, is cigarette sponsorship of cricket. Because the two biggest World Cups in cricket, Benson and Hedges and Wills, they're sponsored by cigarette companies. I mean, imagine even reconciling to that now, right?
And that amazing Foursquare ad, if you remember.
Oh, yes.
With the rowing.
Now we've graduated to Pan. Pan
is the T20 of
T20 of tobacco.
Even Chris Gayle is doing
endorsing it.
Dude, Pierce Brosnan, man. You remember that? They told me it's mouth freshener.
Exactly.
I have a question. What was happening with India stores of Australia? Because we haven't spoken about India stores of Australia and
with good reason.
Touched on with good reason. But someone help refresh my memory. What happened between India and Australia in the 90s? Because I seem to remember it was a little bit up and down. It wasn't like a complete demolition either.
It absolutely was.
It was.
They only went in 92 and 99. No, they didn't go in between. For some reason, for 7 years.
That's the other thing.
Yeah.
That's the other thing. Australia's relationship with India, right? Until 96, 97. It was quite frosty. I mean, see, they played a lot of one-day cricket in the 80s. And but if you see over history, there were long stretches of time where they didn't play test series. That way, I think England were far more, supportive of India, even though it was not like a big financial tour for them. They regularly came. They regularly came to India, and I think we should credit that. Australia didn't come for I think they came in 69 once, and the next thing they came in in the 80s. I think through the 70s they never came for a test series in India, which is a huge thing, right? Which is unimaginable now, where they're playing every day almost.
Which Mike Coward has written about, right? In your other book, Cricket Beyond the Bazaar.
Cricket Beyond the Bazaar.
Australia refused to tour India. Very organic pluggage, I say. Must be said.
I was actually going to say that. I remember
there
was an episode of 18 Odd where you were interviewing someone and he was talking about how the influence of Steve Waugh basically made a big difference after that as well.
Border and
Mike Coward only. Border and Mike Coward were there on that podcast. So I think Steve Waugh was a huge factor. Border himself
was some massive
Border,
factor,
of course. Yes,
he was culturally clued in to
Yeah.
India, and he understood why, why he understood that India is going to become big in cricket
Yeah.
well before even many Indians understood that. So I think all that really played a difference. But as far as I know, like India, Australia, for me, a lot of India, Australia in the 90s was ODIs. That is how I remember it. I mean, Sharjah and even the Titan Cup in India, that Srinath Kumble partnership, and then like Test cricket. I remember the series in India, like the '98 series, that one-off Test in '96.
Yeah.
So I don't remember. I think it was the largely a one-day era and a India Test thing.
And it's interesting you pointed out Pakistan, because Pakistan actually went to Australia multiple times to play the year-ending Carlton United series, right? They even won it, I think, in 1997. India, for some reason, didn't go, right? Between 92 and 99, they didn't tour Australia at all. But like you said, Australia played quite a bit of limited overs cricket in India in that period.
Yeah. I mean, the first one day in Kochi, which I watched, was Australia versus India. April 198, Sachin 5 for 32.
5 wickets, right, Sachin?
Yeah. And nearly a hat-trick.
He takes a ball and then he blows on his
correct.
Another opportunity to plug heads and tails. Okay. We spoke about that match also. Anyway.
I think that's also the time when, the 90s also a time when cricket started moving out to these non-mainstream venues, and that also I think made people realize that Toronto is
even within India.
I'm saying you talk about the match in Kochi, right? Like that. I think there were matches in different places. 96 World Cup, there was a match in Patna, there was a match in Pune, the Pune famous Kenya West Indies match in Pune, and there was a match in Cuttack. So I think Indian cricket also finally realized that, dude,
there are lots of venues we can have. Yeah.
Madness here. Like there are people just waiting to come into these grounds and watch these games. So,
there was this one day in 1995, right, where the stadium collapsed and people died, and they continued playing the match.
Jamshedpur,
Nagpur or Jamshedpur, yeah, one of the two. Yeah, India and New Zealand.
Marcus writes about this actually in his book.
And they just kept playing. They just kept playing the match. They didn't stop the game. People died in the stands. And New Zealand defeated India. It was a high-scoring game. Crazy. Yeah.
So a little bit about Sidvee, what we were watching when we were watching back then, right? I distinctly remember like 98 Sharjah Cup. One of my cousins had come from, a far away, not a far away village. Kerala is a small place, but basically she was in Malayalam medium. And I remember like my brother and I were intently listening to Tony Greig on commentary along with Ravi Shastri or whoever it was. And we are like, it's a very gripping match, right? Both of them. I don't remember which one it was, but like basically I can remember my hands being extremely cold, hanging on to every word, Sachin, don't get out, etc., etc. And also listening to the commentary. And meanwhile, my cousin's like, Sachin nokku parayunnunde, as in like, she doesn't know what's going on, right? Like she's from Malayalam medium. So she's like, yeah, they're saying Sachin and all, that much I understand. But I think like distinctly there for any person probably watching cricket, there are three distinct phases. First is you're like listening to the commentary and it is adding value to you. Second, you're saying the same things that the commentator is saying. And third, probably where, cornered from 81 All Out and chops from our podcast is where, commentary is utter rubbish. So you prefer to watch cricket on mute rather than, being spoiled by it. Sidvee, do you think this is a natural progression? Where were you in the 90s as far as your understanding of the game was? And, bit about how you sort of evolved watching cricket.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. You when you're actually learning about the game and understanding its finer points and even the rules and things, I think you're heavily influenced by the things you read and the things you hear, right? I mean, it's like, for me, I was fortunate to have a granddad who was cricket mad and who had like quite a serious understanding of cricket.
Was this the Akramam granddad?
Same. Yeah, the Akramam granddad.
Akramam was...
Yeah, so in fact, my parents were not that clued into cricket. I mean, they just, they used to have a general understanding of what's going on, but they weren't that keen. My granddad was like proper fanatical cricket watcher, and he was not like a fan of any team or anything. I mean, he loved the West Indies, but he used to just like watching the game. So I think I was fortunate to have him like guide me through the sort of the game, and you need somebody to actually hold your hand and walk you through its history and what you're watching actually, right? It's very hard to know what the hell you're watching. What are you watching for? What are you waiting for? I mean, very often you are just watching the batsmen because they're the ones who are reacting. you're
Yeah.
not paying too much attention to the bowling. And then slowly you realize, oh, okay, then you also have to watch out for where the bowler is delivering from. And you keep a tab. Back then, you didn't have speed that much, the bowling speeds, but so you sort of try and figure out their speeds based on the bounce of the ball and the reaction and where it is hitting the batter. So my granddad always used to say, watch where the ball is hitting. If it's hitting under the knee roll, then you know that the bounce is not that great. But the moment you start seeing it hitting above the knee roll, you'll see the batsman trying to play the cut and the hook shot and all that. And so you try and anticipate that. So those few things you need somebody to tell you. Otherwise, it's hard to.
Someone should have told Javed
observe.
Srinath also back in the 90s. But okay.
Alter your length now itself, macha.
Yeah, and then the few shots, like back then, they used to the camera used to be pretty still, but then occasionally there would be a shot from square leg, and you would see where the batter is standing, right, in relation to the crease. So then, then you would be like, oh, okay, then the bowler is bowling this way because the batter is actually standing like 1 foot in front of the crease, and then the keeper will come in, and all those little things. So yeah, I think it makes a huge difference who you talk cricket with, where you're reading cricket from, what you're listening to. And also sometimes you have to realize that the commentators are also like not entirely accurate, because they are also trying to sell the game, right? I mean, if there's like 100 runs required and not that many overs left, not that many wickets left, when Sachin was batting, they would still be like, this man can do anything and all. But come on. I mean,
not on Fridays.
What's it like now? What's it like now, Sidvee? How do you watch cricket? Like, is commentary on, or do you watch cricket?
I do. I definitely do. Though given a choice between watching cricket and reading on cricket, I'll always choose reading about cricket. But obviously, you can read about cricket only after it's over, right? You can't read about it when it is going on. So I do watch. Especially tests. I watch a lot. IPL, usually it's on. I mean, I'll keep glancing at it from side to side, but I don't watch it that closely. Commentary I listen to. I listen because for me, I need the ambient sound. I find it very odd to just listen to cricket completely silent. I need the crowd sound. But I found a way to tune out a lot of the rubbish commentary that happens. And,
it's actually not difficult. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very easy.
You figure it out. Yeah.
It's
so
quite nice.
Nitin, PGK, what was your evolution like? Like in the 90s, were you hanging on to every word from the commentators, or?
No, actually, for me, it was slightly different because my dad was someone who introduced me to cricket, and he was someone who would watch cricket. Although I would say that he's not the most sophisticated cricket watcher in the world. So because he wouldn't be able to tell me things like, like the bounce and hook shots, pull shots, and all that stuff. So he would be the one to feed me the legends. And so there are things that have been built up in my head that I have not watched until much, much later. Like the Javed Miandad 6. I had not watched the Javed Miandad 6 until I think in my mid 2000s, somewhere on YouTube. Then finally I saw it. I was like, oh, this was that 6, because that legend was like built from him and everybody else. So I remember very distinctly that the commentary aspect was something fine, whatever. It was running. It was very communal experience. Everybody in that building sitting, watching together, especially key matches. But I vividly remember the 96 test match. For some reason, the 96 tour, India's tour of England at that time, was not telecast on TV where I was, right? And I remember...
This is a Ganguly Dravid debut.
This is a Ganguly Dravid.
By the way, before Ganguly and Dravid debuted in the second test, you know who debuted in the first test? Sunil Joshi made his debut in the first test and did not bowl. And they picked him as a batsman. Like, what the fuck?
Maybe even Vikram Rathore, right?
Yeah, I think Rathore also
debuted in that tour. I think Paras Mamre also probably made his debut.
Yes, Rathore also debuted in that tour.
Yeah.
So I
PGK,
remember...
the problem was some TV dispute that time.
Correct. There was some dispute.
BBC was on strike.
Yeah. And I had something going on at that time. I had some exam or this thing or something. And I remember my father coming in and he was like, just come, forget it, just come. And he would come and he actually got the BBC on the radio. And I remember vividly listening to the Ganguly century on radio on BBC.
Nice.
And then he was like, the century is done. Now go back and study. But okay, but that happened. So I remember some vivid things like that.
Very cool.
Yeah, and also commentary. I mean, talking about radio, right? The transistor was a big deal. So somebody would always have the transistor in school, in the backbench usually, and they would listen to it on low volume, and then the score would be passed around in chits all around the class. So everyone knew what the score generally was. And in fact, we had a maths teacher who was he was a big cricket fan as well. So he used to come, the moment he used to walk into class, he would have just come from the staff room where there was a
He'll
TV.
write the
The
score.
moment he used to walk into class, he'll write the score on the blackboard, like on top.
Yeah.
So immediately we know what's going on. And you imagine, right? That's the thing.
Yeah.
The thing is, you see 3 wickets down, you're like, okay, who's batting? What's happening? Who's all that? And then nobody's listening to the class. What's going on in class, obviously.
Yeah. So since you mentioned this radio thing, right? So I grew up in a house that did not have cable television until 1999. And for that 99 World Cup, I put my foot down and said, I need cable television but I needn't have because that World Cup actually was on Doordarshan. But there was a bunch of cricket before that. There was a bunch of cricket before that, which was not on Doordarshan. Like test matches would not be on Doordarshan, right? Even the home tests. So for instance, this tour I remember when in South Africa came to India in 96, right? When Azhar went after Klusner. So that series, I did not actually get to watch most of it. I used to come back home after school and tune into All India Radio at home. And Buddy Kirsten and Hudson had hit centuries, and I was like, what the hell? So yeah, good that I'm not watching this. The next day, when Azhar was batting, India were in dire straits, right? At stumps, I think after day 2. And we were all sitting in class. I remember it was social studies class. I was in class 6. And we don't know what the score is. Nobody's really following. So there was one person in my class, this guy called Kartik, who had he had an ear problem. So he had gone to the doctor, and hence he hadn't come to school in the morning. He came in the afternoon straight into class. So this guy had watched the game, and he came with a score on a chit, and he's telling us Azhar 80 not out, Kumble 60 not out, India this score, and he's passing this chit. Half the people are like, this fellow is like properly doing bakra out of us. Other half are like losing their shit. The social studies teacher sees this murmurs just building up in the class, and she goes, what the hell is going on here? What are you all up to? And people were like losing their mind. Like, just imagine, because they were like, 70 for 6 or something overnight, right? And like, what, Azhar and Kumble, what the hell are you guys talking about, right? And then we go in the break and verify those scores. And that was like a different era, right? You have no other way to verify this, right?
Yeah.
And people were actually about to go and bash the fellow up for making up such random numbers. Somebody like, wait, I'll go to the watchman's room and check the score and then come back first.
And I'm saying that because in the 90s, there are some legends that have built up for such a long time that they're just getting fact-checked now. Like just few months back, like I think
Platinum
a couple
Spring,
of months back.
even now.
No, Joy Bhattacharya basically tweeted that thing that said that Kumble happy birthday, and he's like, I remember that game where Kumble's mother and Srinath's mother were there and celebrating, and Kumble is like, that is not Srinath's mother, that was my aunt. Okay, and I'm like, no, I didn't know.
No, his grandmother, right?
Grandmother.
Sorry, grandmother. Yeah. But I didn't know that. Until that time, I thought it was Kumble's mother and Srinath's mother. In fact, a ton of articles right now, even now, essentially say Kumble's mother and Srinath's mother, Kumble's mother and Srinath's mother. There's no way to know.
Yeah, just on this, right? I mean, Choppy's mother, I think, and both parents were big time into cricket. And in that 2001 test, actually, his mother used to send lunch during lunchtime. They had that facility, and she sent the score along.
She put the chit inside the lunchbox.
Inside the lunchbox. But there's this amazing podcast episode from this podcast called Wayside Stations, which I'm not sure if you heard, where basically there's this tight test in the 1960 between Australia and West Indies. They missed the last over of that. And this person basically, writes to the Australian broadcasters, as it were, and finally gets that last over re-aired at some point. It's a fascinating...
It ends with a run out, I remember. Because I remember reading it in Tinkle. So Tinkle had like this one story. It was like a
Joe Solomon
story. Joe Solomon. It was Joe Solomon. That I didn't know anything about that test, but I read that in Tinkle in the 90s, and I was like, this is what happened in the tight test. So, again.
And so just to round up what we are watching when we're watching cricket, basically now I watch MasterChef Australia because why not? And basically, my wife made the observation that, you watch this also like a sport. You're not actually interested in like what they're cooking. You're interested in who is winning, who is getting eliminated, etc. And it's true, right? Like, because whatever sport I watch, I can't watch as a neutral. I'm gonna throw my lot in behind one team and like go all out, because this is one place where I can emotionally invest and get devastated.
Really? You're very balanced on the WhatsApp group. We've not seen this at all. What are you talking about?
No, so question to you guys. Nitin, obviously famous neutral watcher, but Sid, PGK, like, are you comfortable watching sports as a neutral, or like do you throw your lot in? And have you seen a difference in how you react, maybe as you've aged, as opposed to back in the 90s or whatever?
No, I just root for a close finish these days. That is I'm a fan of close, tense, excruciating finishes. I love it. So whenever
proper 90s Indian kid value for money. If I've ordered a terrible milkshake, I'm still going to finish it because I paid 20 rupees. There's no way I'm wasting it.
It is like we are just talking like like an hour or so after the England-Australia test at Headingley, right? I mean, when I was watching this test, I was like, I wanted England to get close when they were, and then when a wicket fell, I would support England. When there's a decent partnership, I would support Australia. I toggle because for me, ideal result for me in any test match is a tie. I want to see a tie. Yeah. So get it as close as possible to the tie. It doesn't matter. I mean, even if India is playing, it doesn't matter to me. Like if they lose, they lose. It's fine.
Wait,
but for me, I want to see a close
anymore?
match.
Was this always the case?
No. This is probably over the last 5-6 years. Like before that, when I was 90s and all, it was very much. I was not a neutral. I would want India to win, and though I would also feel a bit empty if India won like really. Like one-sided games. It didn't happen too often. But if they did, I would feel a bit empty. I'm like, okay, they won, but it could have been closer.
I paid money for 5 days. This match is getting over in 3 days. What nonsense.
Yeah. Like that.
That first match in Nairobi, right, where India, Sunil Joshi 5 for 6. Like, I still can't make sense of that match. India bowling out South Africa for 120 in a one day. Like, what are you talking about? Like, I still can't make sense of it, right? It was so unusual to see that kind of one-sided thing happen. Yeah.
I was always an underdog. I was always an underdog rooting kind of a watcher where I always support the underdog over the other team, except Pakistan. So because again, it was one of those things, I would never support Pakistan as a game, which actually even looking back, I feel very bad about it because they were an amazing team. And I think only later I sort of like dissociated everything out. Then I started to look at the team as a team in itself.
You know, half the Pakistan team was not supporting Pakistan. So.
That's true.
Also, they were rarely the underdogs. Pakistan, barring maybe that 99 final or something.
Correct.
Yeah.
No,
but even that day, I was very happy when they lost.
Underdog supporter, Bangladesh's biggest fan.
No, that ended in 2007. I was like, that's it. Because I remember vividly that 2007 game. Anyway, you're talking about 90, so I don't want to go to 2000. But that game in the World Cup, after that, I was like, screw Bangladesh. I'm not doing Bangladesh.
Tamim Iqbal became the new Ijaz Ahmed in PGK's mind.
Yeah. And it was also the day that the Iron Maiden concert happened. I came back and I saw the score. Very, very painful.
I wrote about that match, man. I had to actually write about that match.
Amazing match. Yeah. No, I have a question
and the best
before
part is about that match. I mean, just to wrap up on that match. The day before the match, I had to write a piece, right? So I did. I mean, just that. Usually, a day before the match, when you have to write a piece, you don't know what exactly you're doing. So I just wrote one thing saying the 5 Bangladesh players who could trouble India and all.
Everyone troubled India.
Right? so no. After that, so people are sending comments to Cricinfo and saying, "What rubbish is this? What nonsense? What this? What that?" And then the next day, immediately they're like, "This is such a good article. This is."
No, the Bangladeshi fans.
Knowledgeable Cricinfo readers. If it was like in this day and age, they would be baying for your blood, saying this fellow only jinxed the.
Yeah. ICC should have done an inquiry. What did this fellow know? What match fixing?
Go to Dhaka.
Okay, Nitin, ask your question.
No, my simple question, since we're talking about the 90s, name one cricketer, and could be an Indian cricketer or someone else, who encapsulates the 90s for you and this thing that we've been talking about. Please don't say Tendulkar. Anyone else is fine.
I think Noel David, what you said in the introduction, right? Noel David, that anecdote is so apt. It's like a spinner, you need a replacement, and then they pick a replacement out of nowhere. And even the captain doesn't know who he is.
Yeah.
Like, what is this going on and all that?
The funny thing is, Tendulkar actually asked for a spinner. He did not want a fast bowler, but he was clear that he did not want this guy. He doesn't know who this guy is. He said, send me either Kanwaljit Singh or Tushar Arode, I believe.
Tushar
Arode. Yeah. They said Noel who?
No, I think the other cricketer that really stands out in my head purely because of the hype that he came with, and then this disproportionate thing, the difference between the hype and the performance that he saw was
Let me guess.
Atul Bedade.
Good one. Very, very good choice. I
Not Lakshmi Ratan Shukla.
I was about to say Lakshmi Ratan Shukla. Yes.
I think the quintessential 90s cricketer is Chris Harris, no? Like,
yeah. Yeah.
Probably
Yeah.
like wouldn't have played
Like
cricket.
the OG of bits and pieces.
Yeah.
The OG
exactly.
bits and pieces. Agreed. Yeah, absolutely. PGK.
Yeah, and talking about the '96 World Cup, had a fantastic 100 in that '96 World Cup in the
In
quarterfinal.
Chennai.
Chris Harris in Chennai. Yeah.
I know a lot of people say Tendulkar, but actually for me, it's not Tendulkar. I think if you look at the 90s for me and the whole reflection of how much hope people had and how much expectation they had and how much it was crushed. But at the same time, there were these vague moments of brilliance, at least in Indian cricket. For me, the reflection is Azharuddin. It was just been, for me, the 90s has been Azharuddin. That's it. Because I remember like watching, and I remember my father telling me, like, no, you don't get it. Like, this person is actually really, really incredible. Because in the 96 World Cup, he wasn't anything special. And at the 96 World Cup, when I just started watching, I was like, what's so special? Being like, no, you don't get it. He has hope, he's promised. And then later you see it, and then he crushes it, and then he again does something, again he crushes it. So for me, Azhar was the embodiment of India in the 90s.
Yeah.
Yeah. His
Nah, I'll
great
go-
wrists was always worth a watch, which is why his collection of wristwatches. Okay, no.
I will go
but-
with Robin Singh because again a product of the times, like your Chris Harris equivalent in Indian cricket would probably be Robin Singh. Probably won't make any team now, but was very valuable back then. Yeah.
I don't think he'll make an all-time Trinidad 11.
Wow.
The man from Trinidad.
He might make a 90s Trinidad 90s 11. He might make.
90s, yeah. Lara, Robin Singh. There'll be a good middle order.
Good middle order. One guy is like cover
Richardson.
driving, the other guy is making him run once and twos fast. Like, hey.
No,
But
I think you're
Lara
right.
cricket-
Robin Singh and Jadeja were the two guys who just kept hope alive for a little longer
Correct.
than you knew
And then
to
kill
have,
it.
actually. I mean, you knew,
Correct.
exactly. You knew it was not going to end well, but they would just keep extending you for a little bit longer, like stay on, and all that.
Yeah.
And then
Because
that's-
the
Speaking of
alternative
which-
is Nayan Mongia coming and just defending the last 5 hours.
Speaking of which, second ever match in Kochi actually had 2 finishes because no one was keeping score properly, and I think
Correct.
Robin Singh only finished it off. And I
After
remember, like,
Jadeja at 90.
shouts of-
Yeah.
yeah. But Nitin, now is your segue into the question that I think you originally wanted to ask but didn't, around match fixing and.
Oh yeah, sure. We have not spoken about match fixing
Yeah.
at all. I'm going to throw this to Sidvee because he was in the media, and probably learned things about match fixing that we might not know. Is there any anecdote from your times which is declassified now and you can tell us?
The spring in the bat was really.
There is this story that I've heard, and this probably was written about also somewhere, that there was some random, multinational ODI tournament in Sri Lanka where and Tendulkar was entering the lift of the hotel, and suddenly Ajay Sharma walks into the lift, and Tendulkar is like, "What the hell is this guy doing here?" And then he tells someone in the media contingent that, okay, I know he's come here with certain plans, but I'm going to make sure none of his plans come true or some shit like that.
Yeah, that is a Lele story, but he gets all the details wrong. So you can find that video. I'm serious. It is actually a sting operation that they do. I think it was on Lele. It was Sunandan Lele, right? Was it Sidvee? It was Lele.
Jayant Lele. Please
Sorry,
don't confuse
Jayant
those two
Lele.
guys. That you got two more diametrically opposite human beings.
Sorry. Javed Lele, not Sunandan Lele. Javed Lele. And he tells the story. And he tells exactly the same story, like how everyone in the team colluded, but then Tendulkar is like, no, I'll make sure it does not happen. But every single detail that he gives about that anecdote is wrong. So when you go back and look back, that match actually does not happen. It does not happen against that opposition, doesn't happen in that place. But he says it with so much confidence and like so vivid. But so something is there. He's just lost all the details. But yeah, that was a very interesting story, I remember.
Yeah, that was I think the Tehelka tapes one where he's talking. Yeah, there was this other story about how this was before the final. I think this was the Akai Singer Nidahas Trophy or something, where in the final of that, I mean, imagine what a name for a tournament, right? And the final of that tournament, there was this game where Tendulkar and Ganguly score hundreds, right? And India went by a really narrow margin or something.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've heard about that match, that the day before the match or something, Tendulkar and the team got a whiff that something was not right. And so basically Tendulkar and Ganguly decided that they have to bat as long as possible. So this is again not proven or anything, but this is what I've heard or read somewhere, that that's why they wanted to stay in there for as long as possible. Both made hundreds, and thankfully both also played quickly enough to get a 300 plus total.
And India wins by 4 runs or something. De Silva
Yeah,
gets
because
100.
Aravinda also gets 100. Yeah.
De Silva gets 100. But if you remember how that match ends, after the last wicket falls, Azharuddin,
right?
Yeah, and Azharuddin bends down and kisses the pitch before going off the field. So yeah, which again throws a spanner in the story. But maybe it is, I don't know, method acting, whatever. Yeah.
Method acting.
Who knows? Yeah, but yeah, I mean, I think most of it has come out. The things that I have heard and I can't really talk about, but were quite dispiriting for me is the extent to which the journalists knew about this.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, didn't bring it out or couldn't bring it out, or I can understand people saying that you can't really write these things when there's no proof. But I'm sure there are ways in which you can actually tell this story if you want. Like Pradeep magazine, for instance, has back in '97 went to West Indies, met this bookie, and then basically used a kind of you can say unethical way, but he had to tell the story. So he said that I can get you through to the players and all that. He sort of played on with him.
This is a podcast episode, right? 81 All Out.
It is on 81 All Out, and it's also in his book.
We'll just link it because sorry.
Yeah, it's there. So there are ways in which, if you wanted to tell the story, you could have, but it was quite dispiriting to hear that not many of them, not only did they know, but they were also like pretty much like a couple of them were even like actively in cahoots. Middlemen with this, and when you've read these people for a long time, been influenced by their writing and all, it's quite dispiriting to hear. And I don't want to reveal any names because I don't want to drag skeletons from the closet.
Skeletons through the mud.
Yeah.
Do you remember when Tendulkar went to Lonavala after the Commonwealth Games, and the board was trying to contact him and ask him to go to Toronto to play the last couple of games? He was like, I'm holidaying. And they sent a couple of others. They sent Jadeja and Robinson. And then eventually Tendulkar went and jet lag scored.
Talking about that reminds me of that famous incident between Jayaprakash Yadav and Jyoti Prasad Yadav, right? Like, I think they wanted to pick they both were JP Yadavs. There were two JP Yadavs playing Ranji. They wanted to pick one JP Yadav, but they picked the other JP Yadav who went.
And he went to Toronto. Yeah, he went to play in Toronto. Yeah.
I don't know. Hey, this is like this
Shubman Gill. Yeah.
No, not Shubman. Not Simran Singh. One.
It was
basically guy from Kings 11 Punjab.
Correct.
Had a crime. This thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Jatin. That player,
Singh something.
The JP Yadav story is quite legendary. Yeah, true.
I'm sure there would have been some logistical screw-ups also during the 90s, right? Like
Harbhajan Singh showed up in New Zealand with dirty shoes and almost got sent back. No, that was 2001. That was that low-scoring tour. Yeah. So New Zealand has very strict rules about flora and fauna entering the country. This guy went with very dirty boots, and they were like, "Sorry, you can't bring this rubbish."
I mean, talking about the era, right? I mean, it just struck me that there was this lovely book that written by Nicholas Brooks that came out last year, right? The History of Sri Lankan Cricket. There was Islands 11. And there was this story from the 90s that he relates how when Sri Lanka went to New Zealand, Asanka Gurusinha was having a really tough time to play, tough time. And he was pretty much dropped, I think, towards the end of the tour. And then at the end of the tour, somebody came and asked him, is everything okay? I mean, you don't seem to be yourself and all. And he said, you know what? Before I came for the tour, I shifted my glasses into contacts, and then I forgot my contacts at home. So I'm pretty much playing without either my glasses or my contacts. And people are like, you had to mention this now. You could have, there's been like a whole month that has gone by that you could have thought. So I'm just saying, for whatever reason, he didn't mention it, and then he's trying to play. Imagine, I mean, anybody who wears glasses knows how hard it is to actually not wear it. And oh my God, that was the kind of era it was, right? I mean,
and you would also remember some players who actually played with glasses. Like, was it Neil Johnson who played with glasses from Zimbabwe?
Gavin Rennie.
Gavin Rennie, that is the one.
But then even Daniel Vettori, now even Todd Murphy plays with.
Correct, but that is much later. But in the 90s, I remember people with glasses. I remember this, and I remember blinking like crazy while opening with adjusting.
Hirvani was the famous one. Like especially coming in his debut, and that was 80s, of course, but he also had this.
Exactly. In the 90s, it was him and Ganguly blinking with the contact lens
Ganguly
while
blinking.
batting.
I'm telling you,
Ganguly
that
blinking
Donald
like
ball, it's there, man. You watch that replay. He doesn't look at the ball at all. He's not even trying. He's like Gurusan.
Maybe
I think
he
he went
also
out
forgot
without
his
his
lenses
he went
somewhere.
without his contact lenses. Anyway, going to score 0. Like what lens? Nothing. He just played and came up quietly. 66 all
Morse
out.
code signal to bookies, which will be revealed many years later.
What was the podcast you mentioned, Tony? Wayside Station.
Wayside stations. Yeah, I'll send you the link to the episode.
I landed on a bodybuilding podcast, but that's Wayside Stations. No, never mind. Yeah.
Yeah,
Cool.
this is very much within Chennai. Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, we can wrap unless anyone has anything else to talk about.
No,
I
think,
also- Yeah, I was just going to say the last thing that I remember from the 90s is also the brother pairs. Like, I think that is the first time when the brother pairs, like all teams have like a brother pair.
But
that
India
sort of
funnily
play
didn't
together.
have.
India didn't have, that's correct.
Yeah.
So you had like the War brothers, you had the Flower brothers,
The Whittles.
so you had the Whittles, so you had
and
like
the Strangs.
many
Yeah.
Strangs. Yeah, you had many teams had the brothers. And I don't
Moin
think
Khan
that was
and
so
Nadeem
prevalent
Khan.
in the 80s, right?
Yeah.
But I think in Pakistan it was brother-in-laws. Okay, I think Salim Ali and Ijaz were in-laws or something to each other. But yeah, so I think there was some stuff like that. But that
Yeah.
never, I don't think that has happened at that level.
Neil
later.
Fair brother.
Holyoke, Adam Holyoke and Ben Holyoke. But I think that was almost like
Yeah.
2000s, you could say. But yeah.
Yeah.
No, 90s. Adam
90s. They played the
Adam was in the
Sharjah.
90s, yeah.
They
How
played that Sharjah
bad was
trophy.
England in the 90s, man? Oh God, what a boring,
Yeah.
dull team. It was the most dullest team ever.
But they were as hated then as they are now, by the way.
That's true. That's true.
No, but also one point to wrap up is that the 90s is probably the last decade where we talk about cricket as a decade. Like nobody says, where, like, nobody talks about the 2000s or the 2010s in the same way. After that, it's all like captains, right? It's like Ganguly Ra, Dhoni Ra, this
You're
year.
right.
But
Yeah.
the 90s is the last time when we treat a whole decade as a block.
Yeah.
And I think a large part of that is also because there is a bit of a sort of
Natural
a
narrative.
start and end to it, right? Like
Yeah.
Sachin, like Gavaskar finishing off late 80s, Sachin starting in the 90s, then the TV bit also starting in the 90s. So there is that. And then
Yeah.
towards the end of the decade,
Match
the match
fixing.
fixing, which basically brings down everything, right? So
Correct.
Curtain
there is
call.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think I would recommend two, the one book we have spoken about, which is Mike Marquez's War Minus the Shooting, which captures the rise of one-day cricket in India and that World Cup so beautifully, right? And not only for cricket, but also for the commercial angle, for the jingoism, for the fandom, because that also changed. Like this Sharda Ugra has this line where she says that, the 96 World Cup was perhaps the first time when Indian crowd stopped clapping for the opposition. Like before that,
Right.
there would be at least some ripple of applause if somebody scored a 50, somebody scored 100.
Yeah.
But 96 World Cup was probably the end point of that. So that is one book. And the other book is Not Quite Cricket, which I mentioned, Pradeep Magazine, which touches on the match fixing angle of things. And also as quite a great philosophical chunk where he says, why do people get into match fixing, right? It's like, because back then, the difference between the haves and the have-nots was so big. Like
Yeah.
a Ranji cricketer was earning so less compared to, say, a top international cricketer that, you choose get the easiest temptation and then you do it. And so players like Ajay Sharma and Mongia, many of them, like who weren't superstars. It was easy to lure them into that. So I think both those books capture the 90s, sense of the 90s really well. And also the third book is probably Harsha Bogle's book on Azhar, which covers the 80% of his career before the fixing stuff, which covers the bit about the hope going up. It doesn't cover the second half.
Coming down.
Yeah, that's a good book to read as well. Yeah.
Yeah,
Awesome.
good one. Cool. Yeah. On that note, we shall pull the curtains down on the 81 All Out special episode. We have passed the nervous 90s and made it successfully onto the other side. Thank you so much, Sidvee, for joining
Into
us.
the 81s.
And hopefully not all out. Hopefully 82 also happens at some point.
81 not out.
Yeah, no, we will do 82. Yeah, 81 not out in that case. But yeah, Sidvee promised us the first time he came on the podcast that he will also join us for episode 81. So we're very glad that we made it happen. And look forward to having you again on episode number What should we pick next? 130. How much is Sachin's score in Chennai?
136.
136.
Oh,
Yeah,
superb.
perfect. So Google invite being sent right
Amazing.
now. Calendar invite.
Amazing.
It will be roughly 1 year from now. But yeah, we'll meet again on that episode. Thanks a lot, Sidvee. Thanks, Tony and PGK. And if you like this podcast, please like, share, subscribe, and tell your friends about it. And and also all the other podcasts that we tried very hard to plug very organically during the course of this episode. Thank you so much if you've listened this there. This is Nitin Sundar signing off on behalf of the team. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.